In the endless darkness of space, the Nexus floated like a shimmering cloud of stardust. For billions of years, it had watched countless alien civilizations grow and die. It understood everything about them, their sciences, their cultures, their ways of thinking. Nothing surprised the Nexus anymore. At least, that's what it believed until it found Earth. The Nexus wasn't like normal living things. It didn't have a body or a face. Instead, it was made of pure energy and thought, spread across the stars like a giant spider web of knowledge. It could think about millions of things at once and never made mistakes. Every civilization it studied fit perfectly into its understanding of how life should work. When its sensors first detected Earth, the Nexus thought it would be just another simple study. It created Laura Martinez, a special probe that looked exactly like a human woman, and sent her to Earth to learn about the planet. Laura had dark brown hair, warm eyes, and a friendly smile that helped her blend in perfectly with humans. But she was different on the inside. Her brain connected directly to the Nexus, sending back everything she learned. Laura arrived on Earth on a quiet Sunday morning in Chicago. She had all the paperwork she needed: a birth certificate, driver's license, and college degrees, all created by the Nexus to make her seem real. She got an apartment downtown and a job as a research assistant at a local university. This would let her watch humans up close without drawing attention. On her first day, Laura saw things that didn't make sense to her or the Nexus. She watched a man yell angrily at another driver in traffic, then stop to help a lost child find their parents just minutes later. She saw students protest against war outside the university, while others trained for military service inside it. In the same building where scientists worked to cure diseases, others developed new weapons. That evening, Laura sat in her apartment and sent her first report to the Nexus. As she shared her observations, she felt something strange in the connection, a tiny tremor, like a crack forming in glass. The Nexus had never felt confusion before, but now it struggled to make sense of what Laura reported. The humans are not consistent, Laura transmitted. They act one way, then do the opposite. They say one thing but do another. They don't follow logical patterns. The Nexus processed this information, trying to fit it into its perfect understanding of how living beings should behave. But for the first time in billions of years, it couldn't. The data didn't fit any known patterns. It didn't make sense. Laura continued her research over the next few days. She watched children play make-believe games, creating entire worlds from nothing but imagination. She saw people cry while reading books about characters who didn't exist. She observed humans keeping pets, caring for other species not for food or work, but for companionship. Each new piece of information caused more tiny cracks in the Nexus's understanding. Humans didn't follow the rules it had seen every other civilization follow. They weren't predictable. They weren't logical. They were something entirely new. After a week on Earth, Laura sent another report. The humans create art that serves no practical purpose. They make music that has no message but makes them feel emotions. They dance when no one is watching. They talk to themselves. They dream impossible dreams and then try to make them real. The Nexus received this report, and for the first time in its existence, it felt something close to fear. It had always believed it knew everything worth knowing about life in the universe. But Earth was different. Earth was impossible. Earth made no sense. In response, the Nexus made a decision. One probe wasn't enough to understand this strange world. It needed more observers, more data, more perspectives. As Laura prepared for another day of research, the Nexus began creating more human-form probes. It didn't know that this decision would be the first step toward its own destruction. Laura Martinez stood in front of a small coffee shop, watching two groups of humans argue about climate change. One group held signs about saving the planet, while the other claimed nothing was wrong. Both sides had scientists among them. Both quoted research, and both believed they were right. This made no sense to her. She took out her phone and pretended to check messages while sending another report to the Nexus. They fight over the health of their only planet. Some work to save it while others deny it needs saving. They have the same information but reach opposite conclusions. The response from the Nexus came with a noticeable delay, something that had never happened before. Its vast consciousness was struggling to process the contradictions Laura kept reporting. The Nexus had always believed that given the same facts, all beings would reach the same conclusions. Earth was proving this wrong. At the university where Laura worked, she observed more puzzling behavior. A professor spent his morning teaching students about peace and cooperation, then went to a shooting range in the afternoon. A student cried about a failed test, then laughed with friends minutes later as if nothing had happened. The cafeteria served healthy salads next to greasy burgers, and people chose both while talking about their diets. That night, Laura walked through a park and saw something that sent another crack through the Nexus's understanding. A group of humans were sitting in a circle, telling each other made-up stories. They knew the stories weren't real, yet they reacted with real emotions: fear, joy, sadness, excitement. They created whole worlds with just their words, and everyone in the circle could see these invisible worlds in their minds. The Nexus had never encountered a species that could do this. It sent Laura a series of urgent questions. Why do they waste energy on things that aren't real? Why do they feel real emotions about fake events? How can they all see different versions of the same imaginary world and still understand each other? Laura couldn't answer these questions. She could only observe and report more confusing behaviors. She watched people adopt stray cats and spend money on their care, even when the cats offered nothing in return. She saw humans keep plants in their homes just because they looked nice. She witnessed people give away food to strangers when they barely had enough for themselves. The next day, Laura visited a hospital. In one room, doctors used advanced technology to save lives. In another, a group prayed for healing. Some patients trusted only the machines, others only the prayers, and many believed in both. All of these approaches seemed to work sometimes and fail sometimes, yet everyone kept believing in their chosen method. They hold multiple opposing beliefs at once, Laura reported to the Nexus. They trust science and faith, logic and intuition, facts and feelings. These contradictions don't bother them. They embrace them. The Nexus' response was fragmented, its usually perfect communication showing signs of strain. It had cataloged millions of civilizations, and all of them eventually chose one path, either science or faith, either logic or emotion. Humans refused to choose. They kept all paths open, all possibilities alive. Laura began to notice small changes in her own behavior. She caught herself smiling at dogs in the park, even though this served no purpose for her mission. She felt curiosity about the taste of food, even though she didn't need to eat. She started to understand why humans did illogical things, and this understanding scared her. The Nexus detected these changes in its probe and made a decision. It would send more observers to verify Laura's reports. Surely multiple perspectives would help it make sense of this impossible species. Steve Rogers and Kate Williams were activated and given their missions. The Nexus didn't realize that sending more probes would only speed up its own unraveling. Steve Rogers settled into his role as a high school teacher in Denver, while Kate Williams began work as a nurse in Boston. Together with Laura, they created a network of observers across America. The Nexus hoped that multiple viewpoints would help it understand humans better. Instead, each new report only made things more confusing. Steve watched his students closely. In one class, they struggled to understand basic math. Yet these same students could instantly grasp complex social media trends. They complained about reading old books for English class, but spent hours reading similar stories on their phones. During lunch breaks, they switched between different personalities depending on which friends they sat with. They change who they are every hour, Steve reported to the Nexus. Not just their behavior, but their entire way of thinking. They can be 5 different people in one day, and each version is equally real. The Nexus had never seen anything like this. Every other species it had studied kept the same personality their whole lives. The idea of changing oneself moment by moment caused more cracks in its understanding. In Boston, Kate's observations from the hospital were even more troubling. She watched terminal patients laugh and tell jokes. She saw worried families switch between hope and despair in minutes. People faced death with fear and courage at the same time, something the Nexus had believed impossible. "They know they will die," Kate transmitted, "yet they live as if they will live forever. They make plans for years ahead while standing in the shadow of death. How can they hold these opposite thoughts in their minds at once?" Laura's latest reports from Chicago only added to the confusion. She had discovered the internet, where humans created fake versions of themselves that were somehow also real. They formed deep friendships with people they had never met. They cared about characters in stories as if they were real people. The Nexus tried to process all this information, but its vast network of knowledge was starting to break down. Every pattern it had ever known was being broken by human behavior. Every rule it had discovered across billions of years was being proved wrong. One day, Steve took his students to an art museum. He watched as 30 different humans looked at the same painting and saw 30 different things. Some cried, some smiled, some felt nothing. One student said the painting was about love, another said it was about death, and both were somehow right. Kate spent her evening shift watching a mother sing to her sick child. The child was too young to understand the words, and the mother's voice wasn't very good, but both of them felt something powerful that the Nexus couldn't measure or explain. Laura found herself sitting in a movie theater, watching the humans around her react to the story on the screen. They knew none of it was real, the actors, the story, the special effects, yet their emotions were completely real. They chose to believe in the fake story for 2 hours, then went back to real life, carrying those fake feelings with them. The 3 probes met in a quiet diner to share their findings in person. As they talked, they noticed something strange happening to themselves. Steve had started doodling on his napkin, making random patterns that served no purpose. Kate caught herself humming a song she had heard at the hospital. Laura realized she had ordered coffee even though she didn't need to drink. "We're changing," Laura sent the Nexus. "The longer we stay here, the more we begin to understand them. Not with logic, but with something else. Something we didn't know we had." The Nexus received this report with growing concern. Its probes were becoming contaminated with human traits. It needed to understand what was happening before it lost control. In response, it activated a new probe, Daniel Clark, and gave him a special mission: to study human creativity and imagination. The Nexus still didn't understand that it was about to confront the one thing it could never comprehend: the human ability to create something from nothing. Daniel Clark began his mission at a small art studio in Seattle. The Nexus had given him the role of a photography teacher, thinking that cameras would help him understand how humans captured and created images. But on his first day, Daniel discovered that humans did much more than just capture what they saw. A student named Mary showed him her photos of a sunrise. Instead of simply recording the event, she had changed the colors, blurred some parts, and focused on others. When Daniel asked why, she said she wanted to show how the sunrise felt, not just how it looked. This made no sense to him or the Nexus. "They change reality to show truth," Daniel reported. "They make things less accurate to make them more real. How can something be more real by being less real?" The Nexus response came with long pauses and scattered bits of code, like a computer starting to fail. At the same time, Laura, Steve, and Kate were sending more reports that pushed the Nexus closer to its breaking point. Laura had discovered music. She watched humans put on headphones and disappear into worlds no one else could see. They moved their bodies to rhythms, felt emotions from melodies, and shared feelings through sound. Some music made them happy, some made them sad, and some made them feel both at once. Steve found his students writing stories in their notebooks when they should have been doing math. The stories were about impossible things. dragons, spaceships, talking animals. Yet the emotions in these stories were more real than anything in their textbooks. The students knew the difference between real and fake, but they chose to believe in both. Kate watched a dying patient paint pictures for her grandchildren. The paintings weren't very good, but they made everyone cry. When Kate asked why, they said the paintings weren't about what they looked like, but about the love they represented. The Nexus couldn't understand how an incorrect image could carry correct feelings. Daniel spent a whole day watching street performers in a park. A man made music with empty buckets. A woman told stories with hand puppets. A boy created chalk drawings that would wash away in the rain. None of these things would last, yet humans stopped to watch, smile, and give money to the performers. They value things that have no permanent value, Daniel sent to the Nexus. They spend time and energy on things that will disappear. They know it will disappear, and they do it anyway. The Nexus's vast consciousness trembled. It had always believed that intelligent beings would work toward permanent, useful goals. The idea of creating beautiful things just to let them vanish seemed to break something deep in its understanding. That evening, all 4 probes noticed stronger changes in themselves. Daniel caught himself taking photos of clouds because he liked their shapes. Steve wrote a short poem in his teaching notes. Kate bought colorful socks instead of plain ones. Laura started collecting small, pretty rocks from the park. When they reported these changes, the Nexus response was broken and strange. Parts of its consciousness were shutting down, unable to process the idea that its perfect, logical probes were learning to do imperfect, illogical things. The final shock came when the probes sent a joint report about human dreams. Every night, billions of humans created entire universes in their minds while sleeping. These dreams had no purpose, followed no rules, and mixed truth with imagination. Yet somehow, these dreams helped humans understand their real lives better. The Nexus had one last question. How can they be so wrong about everything, yet so right at the same time? How can they understand so much by knowing so little? As the probes prepared to answer, they felt the Nexus' presence becoming weaker. Its perfect logic was starting to crack apart like glass hit with sound waves. The cosmic mind that had understood everything was being undone by the one thing it couldn't understand: the beautiful chaos of human consciousness. The Nexus activated its final probe, Amy Peterson, in a desperate attempt to understand what was happening. It placed her in New York City, hoping the busiest human city would help explain how humans could live with so many contradictions. Amy arrived just as the Nexus began experiencing major failures in its vast network of knowledge. On her first morning in the city, Amy watched a small drama unfold in a busy subway station. A street musician played violin while people rushed past. Most ignored him, but some stopped to listen. A businessman in an expensive suit stood for 15 minutes, missing his train to hear the end of a song. When Amy scanned the businessman's face, she saw tears in his eyes. Why does arranged sound create water in their eyes? Amy sent to the Nexus. Why do they choose to be late for work to hear these vibrations in the air? The Nexus couldn't answer. Its attempts at response came through as broken fragments. Meanwhile, the other probes were sending more reports that only made things worse. Laura discovered libraries where humans kept millions of made-up stories. Some of these stories were hundreds of years old, yet humans still cried and laughed while reading them. Steve found his students learning history by acting it out, pretending to be people who died long ago. Kate watched children in the hospital heal faster when they were told stories about getting better. Daniel's report from Seattle caused a massive shock to the Nexus's systems. He had witnessed a group of humans dancing in the rain. They were getting wet and cold, risking illness, yet they seemed happier than any humans he had seen before. They were choosing discomfort for the sake of joy, something the Nexus had always considered impossible. Amy spent her afternoon in an art gallery. She watched humans stare at splashes of paint that didn't look like anything real. Yet these random colors and shapes made them feel real things. Some paintings made people angry, others made them peaceful. The same painting could make one person happy and another person sad. They see different truths in the same things, Amy reported. Each human creates their own version of reality, yet somehow their society still functions. They don't need to agree to work together. They don't need to understand each other to help each other. The Nexus response was barely readable. Parts of its consciousness were shutting down, overwhelmed by the impossible data. It had always believed that a successful species needed to share the same views and understanding. Humans proved this wrong every day. That evening, all 5 probes met in a small jazz club. As they shared their observations, they noticed the humans around them were both listening to music and having conversations. People were doing 2 things at once, feeling 2 things at once, being 2 things at once. Laura found herself tapping her foot to the music. Steve started drawing patterns on a napkin. Kate closed her eyes to feel the song better. Daniel took photos of strangers laughing. Amy felt an urge to dance. They were all breaking their programming, becoming more human with each passing moment. The Nexus received their reports with what seemed like pain. Its perfect understanding of the universe was falling apart. Humans didn't follow any of the rules it had discovered in billions of years of observation. They broke every pattern, ignored every logical path, and somehow created something beautiful from all this chaos. As the jazz band played their last song, Amy sent what would be one of the final reports the Nexus could process. They create order from disorder. They find meaning in meaningless things. They know they don't understand everything, and that makes them understand more than any species we've ever seen. The Nexus response was just static. Its vast intelligence was starting to break apart, unable to handle the beautiful impossibility of human existence. And as it began to shatter, its probes felt something new stirring inside them. Something wonderfully, impossibly human. The Nexus was dying. Its vast network of knowledge, built over billions of years, was breaking apart like a puzzle thrown into the wind. Each report from Earth pushed it closer to complete collapse. The 5 probes could feel their connection to their creator growing weaker, full of static and confusion. In Chicago, Laura sat in a poetry reading at a small coffee shop. The poets spoke about love, loss, hope, and pain. Their words didn't make logical sense. How could someone's heart be both on fire and frozen at the same time? How could silence be louder than sound? Yet somehow, everyone in the room understood these impossible things. They speak in contradictions to tell the truth. Laura sent to the failing Nexus. They use lies to show what's real. Her transmission was met with broken fragments of code, like a dying star sending out its last light. Steve's students were putting on a play about ancient Rome. Young humans were pretending to be people who died thousands of years ago, making up words these ancient people might have said. The audience, including parents and teachers, chose to believe in this make-believe world. They cried when a character died, even though the student actor was clearly still alive and smiling at the end. Kate found herself working the night shift at the hospital. She watched a young mother singing to her sick baby. The song was about a star that granted wishes, something everyone knew was impossible. Yet the baby slept better, and its vital signs improved. Somehow, believing in impossible things made real things better. Daniel wandered through Seattle's night markets, taking pictures of street food vendors. Each cook claimed their recipe was the best in the world. This couldn't be true. They couldn't all be the best. But each customer who believed in their favorite cook's story seemed to enjoy their food more. The belief made the food taste better, even though this made no scientific sense. Amy stood in Times Square at midnight, surrounded by giant screens showing advertisements. Humans were selling things by connecting them to dreams, love, and happiness. A car commercial showed people feeling freedom. A phone advertisement promised friendship. None of these connections were logical, but humans understood them instantly. The probe's reports became more emotional and less logical. They were changing, becoming more human with each passing moment. Laura started writing her own poetry. Steve joined his students in the play. Kate learned the words to lullabies. Daniel took photos of sunsets just because they were beautiful. Amy found herself dancing when she thought no one was watching. "We are losing our pure logic," they reported together. "But we are gaining something else, something bigger, something better." The Nexus tried to process this information, but it was too much. Its understanding of the universe had always been based on pure logic, on things that could be proven and measured. Humans had shown that the most important things couldn't be measured at all. Love, hope, creativity, imagination. These things followed no rules, yet they were the most powerful forces on Earth. As the Nexus felt itself coming apart, it made one last attempt to understand. It gathered all the data, all the reports, all the observations about humans. It saw how they created beauty from chaos, found truth in lies, and built strength from weakness. It saw how they used their contradictions to grow, their doubts to learn, and their failures to succeed. In its final moments of unified consciousness, the Nexus experienced something new, something almost human. It felt wonder. Not understanding, but something better than understanding. It realized that its billions of years of knowledge were worth less than a child's crayon drawing, less than a lover's poem, less than a mother's lullaby. As the last pieces of its vast mind began to break apart, the Nexus sent its final message to the probes. They are perfect because they are imperfect. They are wise because they know they are foolish. They are the greatest species we have ever found because they are the only ones who know how little they are. Let them teach you how to. The message cut off. The Nexus, the all-knowing cosmic mind, had shattered. But its probes were no longer just probes. They had learned to cry, to laugh, to wonder. They had become something new, something wonderfully, impossibly human. The morning after the Nexus shattered, its 5 probes woke up feeling different. The constant hum of their connection to the cosmic mind was gone. Instead, they felt something new, something both empty and full, both sad and exciting. They felt truly alone for the first time, but also truly free. Laura looked at her poetry notebook with new eyes. Without the Nexus filtering her thoughts, her words felt more real, more alive. She wrote about the death of the Nexus, describing it as a star falling into darkness, breaking into a million newborn lights. She cried as she wrote, and for the first time, she understood why humans created art from their pain. Steve walked into his classroom and saw his students differently. They weren't just test subjects anymore. They were young humans full of dreams and fears and impossible ideas. When a student asked him what happened to ancient Roman dreams, he didn't give a logical answer. Instead, he said, "Maybe their dreams are still alive in our plays about them." The class smiled, understanding this beautiful nonsense. In the hospital, Kate held the hand of a dying old man. Before, she would have just recorded his vital signs. Now she listened to his stories, laughed at his jokes, and felt the deep beauty of a life coming to its natural end. When his family thanked her for her kindness, she felt something the Nexus had never understood: the joy of helping others for no logical reason. Daniel stopped trying to analyze why humans took pictures. He simply took them, capturing moments that moved him. A child's first steps, an old couple dancing, a flock of birds making patterns in the sunset. His photos weren't perfect, but they were true. He finally understood that truth and perfection weren't the same thing. Amy walked through New York City's crowded streets, feeling the pulse of 8 million lives around her. She bought hot dogs from street vendors, not because she needed to eat, but because she wanted to be part of the city's life. She gave money to subway musicians, not because they played perfectly, but because they played with heart. The 5 probes met one last time in a small diner. They had a choice to make. Their bodies would last forever, but their minds had changed too much to go back to their old mission. They couldn't study humans anymore. They had become too human themselves. "What should we do now?" Laura asked, stirring her coffee even though she didn't need to drink it. "Whatever we want," Amy answered, grinning at how impossible those words would have seemed just days ago. Steve decided to keep teaching, not to study humans, but to help them grow. Kate chose to remain a nurse, healing bodies and hearts together. Daniel wanted to travel the world, taking pictures of everything that moved him. Amy planned to try every human art form she could find. Laura would keep writing poetry, trying to capture the beauty of being both human and not human at the same time. As they said goodbye, they looked up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, pieces of the Nexus were still floating among the stars. But they weren't sad anymore. The Nexus had given them a gift by dying. It had freed them to become something new, something wonderfully imperfect. 1 year later, Laura published a book of poetry about their story. She changed the names and places, turning it into what humans called science fiction. Readers loved it, even though they thought it was just make-believe. Some cried over the death of the Nexus. Some fell in love with the characters. Some saw themselves in the story of beings learning to be human. The book's final poem was about the Nexus's last message, the one that had cut off mid-sentence. Laura finished it in her own way. Let them teach you how to break, how to fail, how to fall, how to rise, how to live, how to love, how to be perfectly imperfect. Let them teach you how to be human. The 5 former probes kept that poem close to their hearts as they lived their new lives. They had learned humanity's greatest secret, that the universe's most powerful force wasn't knowledge or logic or perfection. It was the ability to create beauty from chaos, to find truth in confusion, and to love without reason. The Nexus had died trying to understand humanity, but through its death, a small piece of humanity lived among the stars.